Thanks so much for joining us here in our conversation with the Culture Roundtable. Today we're going to be discussing vulnerability. Eileen, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
You bet. Eileen Flynn. I am with State Farm Insurance, and I am Vice President of Operations in Richardson, Texas.
Thank you. And Kent?
Hi, my name's Kent Bryce. I'm the Group Vice President for Quality based here at Toyota in beautiful Plano, Texas.
And Tom?
Yes, Tom Foley. I'm a principal at Indigo Group and the go-to when it comes to the Culture Roundtable.
The first thing that we'd like for you guys to discuss today is your thoughts regarding the importance of being vulnerable in the workplace, particularly as it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Eileen, do you have any starting thoughts on that?
Yeah, so thanks, Taylor. And, you know, especially as executive leaders at our companies, we've got to role model the appropriate behavior in order to be vulnerable. So we just can't talk about it. We have to demonstrate it. And a couple of things to me that really help demonstrate it is, you know, if we make a mistake or we do something wrong or we got a data piece, admit it. Admit that you were wrong. So role model that. You know, a lot of people think because we get to these positions that we can do no wrong. Yeah, when we can demonstrate that, you know, we got a metric wrong or we made a mistake, admit it. I think that's a great way to show vulnerability. And then on the flip side, being open to sharing ideas, putting yourself out there, and just be your authentic self. So there are two ways I think that we can role model being vulnerable in the workplace.
Kent, did you have any thoughts on that?
I think Eileen really hit it square on. You know, vulnerability starts with admitting that you don't have all the answers. And I think especially in the DE&I space, you know, nobody is an expert. Absolutely nobody. And if you are open to share who you are, open to continuously learn, then you're going to be successful because it's growth for everybody. Success is only as the whole organization takes a step together. So I think Eileen's given some great examples of some practical things to start with to be successful in the long term.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask you both to share a story now. I'd love to hear about a time, whether professional or personal, when you or someone you know was not treated fairly and how that experience influenced your perspective on vulnerability and specifically in the diversity, equity, and inclusion arena.
So I can start, and I think it demonstrates both, Taylor, because it's the example I'll share. It was a colleague of mine showed vulnerability and quite frankly then was a role model for me and some others on how to be vulnerable and transparent. And I know we hear a lot about George Floyd and his murder on May 25th, but that was a game changer for me. As I watched that unfold on TV, I was just dumbfounded by, oh, here we go again. But then I just kind of went about my daily routine. And I saved this text because it speaks directly to vulnerability. And so a good friend and colleague of mine, in fact, I've been her boss, she's been my boss, now we're peers. A couple days later, she sent this text to me and two of our colleagues. I want to share with my friends some insights from my perspective. My heart is breaking out here like everyone's who can comprehend what is really happening. This runs so deep in our society that most choose to ignore it. I am the mother of two wonderful, glorious African-American men who have to adjust their lives each day because of the color of their skin. We can no longer stay silent about the inequities. Violence is not the answer. And I know so many who are not promoting that, but feel the need to be heard. Engage in dialogue, listen to the issues, try walking in each other's shoes. We can conquer it all with love. I so value and appreciate our friendship. Love you. I got that. And I mean, I still get emotional when I read that, because I've known her for 20 some odd years. She's been a friend, a colleague, and I never knew what was going on in her life. And it just profoundly changed the way I approach diversity, equality, and inclusion. And so I have been on a quest to be educated, to be vulnerable, to ask questions when I feel uncomfortable. And so that is a very personal and professional example of someone who role modeled what it means to really be vulnerable, ask for help, and really be about taking action and making sure that there is change moving forward.
Kent, did you have a story that kind of fits into that realm?
Yeah, I think the story I think that struck me goes back quite a ways, and I think in this whole space, as I've felt for a long time, there's no single point in time, but there's a journey and a number of events that trigger you on the journey. So I'd like to take you back to very early in my life. This is as a student, a college student. I studied mechanical engineering, and at that time, highly male-dominated field. And we had, in a class of about 60, just 3 females in our class. And one day, we were chatting with one of our female peers and classmates, and she shared with us, as we prepared for our internships, that that she was struggling because in many of her previous internships, she'd experienced sexual harassment that had gone unchecked. And it was influencing, and it was striking to me that that was now at a very early stage in her career as a male. We would choose our internships based on the opportunity. But as a female, she was now being steered and choosing her career path, the things that would set her career out, based on trying to measure what the environment was going to be like, what the culture was going to be like. That was extremely powerful, to think that a company culture will define someone's life beyond just that moment in time. So it's really influenced me over a number of steps in the journey, whether it's to reach out to mentor, especially females in the STEM fields, or just being an advocate of a strong company culture.
Absolutely. Tom, did you want to share anything on this topic?
I had a question or two for both Eileen and Kent. Eileen, when you introduced the suggestions to be a vulnerable leader, it starts with admitting mistakes and being your authentic self. Mm-hmm. And as a successful executive woman, I would love to get your opinion on the challenges associated with navigating that as a leader, and sharing what I've heard through a series of conversations that admitting mistakes, if 1 + 1 = 3 is easy. Admitting mistakes when they're on issues that are more uncomfortable becomes difficult because of exposure and potentially the cancel culture component. As a woman leader, I've heard certainly that, particularly as we advance, that years ago, women had to distinctly create 2 personas, one work persona and one outside of work persona. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts about your journey in that aspect, and if you've seen an opportunity to blur that line, if it ever existed.
Yeah. I've seen women who feel like they have to prove themselves because they're a woman. And what I've been coached on, and now what I coach others, is let your work speak for itself. Now, by the same token, sometimes you have to be your own advocate. Don't assume that your good work is going to speak for itself. You have to let the work be outstanding, but sometimes then you have to be You have to be your own best advocate. And some people feel uncomfortable doing that. And so I think sometimes we have to talk about the difference between networking and sucking up. And there's a distinct difference between those two. Because in order to make sure that your brand is what you need it to be, that you are being your own advocate and others are advocating for you, you absolutely have to have a network. And I think one of the best ways to do that is making sure you've got a good group of mentors, and not only mentors that are either at the same level or above, but that whole notion of reverse mentoring and staying in tune with folks that are at different levels, maybe below you, so that you can, I've heard the phrase, you need a checkup from the neck up on an annual basis. And so having your own little board of directors to help you do that. But Tom, at the core, to me, you've got to be your authentic self. You've got to be your own cheerleader, and then you need a board of directors to help you do that as well.
I think that's great advice. Kent, building on that, as a white male executive, you certainly, even in the short time we've been having a conversation today, have shown your awareness and thoughtfulness, even talking back in college with women students that had different challenges as they selected their professional position. Eileen had talked about the willingness to have uncomfortable conversations, and I brought up cancel culture, and I'm curious as to any thoughts or suggestions you have for leaders, and particularly white male leaders, on having conversations that are uncomfortable. And the vulnerability that I'm thinking about is, as a leader, it's much easier for me to focus on the business components and business performance, have my vulnerability relative to, we didn't hit our goals, how can we improve? But that next conversation around emotion is challenging. And I'll share one aspect. I had gone on an event that was called Leaders and Daughters, and there was a woman who was general counsel of an oil and gas company. Oil and gas, certainly significantly male-dominated category. And she said, imagine a world where women felt comfortable leading and men felt comfortable crying. And it was interesting to me because you always self-identify. You go to how it relates to you. So I'm a man and I think about crying, and I'm absolutely uncomfortable crying. And what I realized was she's sharing with me that there are women that, as uncomfortable as I am crying, they are as uncomfortable leading because of what's been developed previously. So that was a whole lot I just threw out there, Ken. And you can take it in a whole bunch of different directions, but I'd love your thoughts as a white male leader specifically, what thoughts you have and advice either you give your younger self or maybe you give an emerging leader.
Yeah, thanks. Tom, there's, as you said, a lot in there. And I think if we go on the theme about the advice, Eileen said authentic, right? If you're not authentic, people will see through that right away. And then leadership is truly that. It's leadership. It's influence. It's, you can find an answer to a technical problem anywhere. There's so many people who can give you that. But a leader inspires, and a leader motivates. And for you to be an individual, to be inspired and to be motivated, they need to see you as a human. Mm-hmm. And they need to see you as understanding their challenges, understanding their difficulties. And I think if you're not open to the vulnerabilities, to the blind spots that you have as an individual, then you're ultimately you're going to fail. So the reality in our workforce today is tough. It's tough to find talented people. And if you want to go to the most basic notion, if you're going to be a successful company, the metrics are clear. Engaged companies, engaged people are the most productive. So as a leader, what's your driving force at the end of the day? You want to have success for your organization. That means success of your people. So, when you unpack these things, even if you start at that most basic level, and it is the most basic level, you've got to think about motivating your people, and to motivate them, you've got to understand them. And that means you've got to understand your blind spots, and you've got to understand the things that are the micro inequities that you as a leader might put forth in your organization. The only way to uncover those things is to be open and to listen to others, and to learn, to be in a continuous learning journey.
One thing that I've been asking myself, and now I want to ask you guys, is give me some good solid examples of how you kind of make sure that everyone who works for you feels like they're in a place that cares about them, they're in a place that they feel like they belong, and then back to Kent's point, make sure they're engaged, make sure they're excited about what they're doing and the people they're working with.
So I can start, especially advice for someone who's newer to role. I've moved 10 times with State Farm, and have probably had 3 times as many teams through the different responsibilities. And job one, get to know your people first. Because if you just start, I need this, I want this is the due date, you've got to build that foundation, get to know them personally, professionally. Don't cross the line on the personal side. I mean, it really depends upon what line of work you're in, but you can get to know your folks personally, professionally. What did you do over the weekend? Hey, how are your kids? Understand you got a new dog. And so that is, to me, that's just 101. But if you really want to think about as a newer leader and building that foundation of relationships, most of the time you're sitting down in those initial meetings and you're sharing, with your team, this is what I expect of you individually, collectively. One of the things I love to do is, in that same conversation, turn the tables and ask your employees a couple of things. One, what do you expect of me? I'm your leader. I'm your new. What do you expect of me? Second question I'd love to ask is, give me your don't do list. And by doing things like that, you're showing vulnerability. And you'd be surprised at some of the responses that you receive. And so whether you're a new leader or you're an experienced leader, when you have a new team, or even if you want to just do a reset, asking questions like that, it does so many things on so many levels.
Absolutely. Kent, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just, that early leader phase, I think, is probably the most challenging phase in anybody's career. And I think today, more so than ever, the expectations on a new leader are higher than ever. I mean, you look at what's happened in the last year and a half, with the constantly shifting landscape of blending of work and home. These are not new concepts. So I think Eileen's provided some excellent advice. Just to maybe add to that is, I think as a new leader, you shouldn't be hesitant to go and learn from some of the resources you can pull from. I think everybody should take multiple times courses on blind spots. I mentioned that before. I've done it several times. I've done it in groups that I knew well. I've done with groups that I didn't know the individuals. You can't not go through a session where you peel back that onion. So in addition to the techniques that can be offered by your board of directors, as Eileen shared with you, I think that every organization, every leader should reach out to their organization, see what's there, because there's a whole opportunity of resources, and through your network, your own network, ask. People in this space they just love to share, because it's not a zero-sum game in the DE&I space. Everybody wins. State Farm, Toyota, we both win by us sharing, and with this whole network that you've created. So that would be my additional piece of advice, is the fact that people are listening and reading about this network. Tap into it and maximize it out, because this is just a great opportunity for you to build new tools and new techniques. And not one single one is going to win the race. It's a continuous evolution of these things.
One thing that just your answers kind of stood out, and something I wanted to circle back on briefly, in diversity, equity, inclusion specifically, but also kind of leadership broadly, you do end up asking a lot of questions and, wanting to hear stories from people and thoughts and perspectives. How do you create an environment where the people who work with you feel like it's okay to be vulnerable? I know, Eileen, you kind of mentioned earlier, and Kent both mentioned earlier, kind of modeling that, being vulnerable to start with, but are there any other things that you would mention that create that kind of space for vulnerability from everyone?
This is probably so academic, but as I'd mentioned with the events of May 25th and the murder of George Floyd, my team, we decided we were going to every week carve out part of my staff and have what we called conversations worth having. And we rotated who was going to facilitate. And initially it was about bring something that you've learned from a DE&I lens, share it with the group. Sometimes they were videos. So we talked about Black Lives Matter. We talked about the Tulsa massacre. We talked about people with disabilities. We asked some really tough questions, and there have been a couple of times. I mean, it was incredibly awkward at first. We've gotten more comfortable, and then every once in a while somebody will really challenge the muscle memory. But I think one of the biggest takeaways is it's got to be, this whole DE&I has got to be within our DNA. It's not a seminar, it's not a book, you've got to really just incorporate it into what you do on a daily basis. And I know there was a tendency initially when I even was just carving out time in my staff meetings, but we've got so many deadlines and things, let's scratch that first. And we never did that. And so just being disciplined with whatever it is that you're going to do, whatever tactic, whatever strategy, keeping that at the forefront. So, because until it becomes like breathing, we've got to continue to just keep doing things to mix up the muscle memory so that we can be more engaged, more enlightened, and quite frankly, just more respectful of everyone around us.
Yeah, this is Kent. So I'd maybe, I too, and I think leaders around the country did a lot of their own unique things, as Eileen described, and those are fabulous. Similar things in our own groups that created great dialogue. I just wanted to catch on one point that Eileen mentioned, which is, I really liked how she said it. It's got to become natural, like breathing. It's got to be interwoven into your DNA. And again, coming back and just thinking about some of the basics is, do you have a DE&I policy? Do you have the term that people refer to? In our space, it's respect for people is ingrained into our mission and in our DNA and our what we call the Toyota way. So I think as leaders, you can think about how to incorporate those statements, those mission statements, those mandates into your daily lives to facilitate not just you, but other leaders being able to pick up on those, and then creating the opportunities to come together and share what's working within your own teams. I think there's some other opportunities again to hitch your wagon to some of the things that are going on in the community. You know, June, Pride Month, what a great opportunity to reach out to the members in your organization who maybe are a little bit reserved and not comfortable coming forward. But if you as a leader say, hey, you know, this is the month where we're recognizing, you know, whatever whatever group is represented on our calendar. That's just an easy way to go and just do something a little different to recognize it. It may not be overt. It may be, you know, people raising their hands. It may be in some cases, like we've had here, celebrations of, you know, masses of people and food. You know, this is pre-COVID, but that's fabulous. Do it in your own way. And I think, you know, on your journey, you can take steps. No one's expecting you to come out of the gate from not talking at all to, you know, having a calendar and events set up that you're going to have employee resources groups coming out of, you know, out of things. These take time to build. So start with those things that are out there and the framework that's there, and you'll be amazed at the hand raisers who really want to take it to the next step. And that's when you know you're doing the right thing, because you've got engagement of people who are enthusiastic and want to make it work in your own way that works for you and your team.
But it's very engaging for me to listen, Eileen and Kent, to your thoughts. And what I pull from it is the simplicity of a sense of belonging, that it's at the human level. I think in the corporate world, we certainly should create accountability for DE&I to measure it and understand. But at points, I think we, to a too great an extent, define these roles and obligations and try and create all due respect to consultants, you know, a consultant's framework on how you're going to drive DE&I. And at the end of the day, the things that both Kent and Eileen that you shared are the simplicity of it. Let's have a conversation worth having. I can't script that in a consultant's outline of how we're going to measure that. That's just being human. That's your authentic self. Kent, when you're talking about just recognizing, what you're really talking about is changing your perspective, seeing it from a different viewpoint. I know as an attorney, you talk about the unreliability of witness observations because people don't see the same thing. And when it comes to the experiences of others, you know, I've often said that, you know, what you get is what you see. So you have to change what you see. And that's what you're talking about. Let me understand it. The text, Eileen, that you read earlier, you know, you're putting yourself in your colleague's shoes and saying, I never thought about it that way. And it harkened back where I was in a meeting and it was around race relations, and a Black woman said the same thing, where I'm afraid when my son leaves the house every day. And, you know, I didn't think about it because it wasn't something that society based on its inequities caused me to think about. Mm-hmm. Second you do, now I see a lot more. So I appreciate how you've approached that. A lot of intentionality around both Eileen and Kent, your careers. I'm sure we can talk, and I'm sure you've got 100 more experiences behind it, but I'll turn back to Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think for this last question, since vulnerability is the word of the day, I'm going to ask you guys to share another personal story, maybe about a time that you felt like you were making a decision that you knew would put yourself in a position that you might fail, or you might be judged, or this could hurt you in some kind of way. Tell me about a time like that in your careers. Let's start with Ken.
Okay, sure, Taylor. You know, it's a great question. Any leader anywhere throughout their career has to make some tough choices. And that's tough choices on business, but it's also do things to advocate for, to stand up for your folks. You know, whether that's, you know, things I did over the course of my career to stand up for, you know, people who didn't have equitability in their rights as LGBTQ community before that even existed for same-sex couples, for single parents to get an equal shot at development opportunities. But you know, it extends all the way through to leaders putting themselves out there in this last year for standing up for the atrocities around George Floyd's murder and the visibility that we all became aware of, and our Asian Pacific Islanders that what happened to them too. But what I'm coming to is, Taylor, is that the irony of your question to me as a white male with privilege is that during all those times, I never felt that I was at risk, that my career was at risk, that I as an individual for who I was at risk or going to be questioned. And I think that's a real tough question to ask of me, because the reality when you open your eyes and you learn and you open to these other opportunities of seeing through other people's perspectives is that you realize that in every other case, there's groups, there's individuals that truly were at risk when they did those same things that I did as a white male. So this is I think a message to the other white male leaders out there is the allyship. That's the role that you play. You know, you did not have those experiences. You never will. You can't understand the perspective. It's impossible. You can learn, you can try, you can grow. But the most important thing and the first thing you need to do is use the opportunity you have to be their ally and help them tell their story, help them in their journey and everyone else's journey. And that's what I can do, because it's a reality that privilege has been in place and unfortunately still does exist to a large extent.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Eileen?
Yeah, Ken, I love that, because I also believe being an ally is so important, and being a white female. So I shared early my conversation with my Black female colleague, and Tom, to your earlier point, I've never had to sit my two kids down. I've got a boy and a girl, and I've never had to sit them down and say, hey, you're going out. If you get stopped by the police, here's your list of what to do and what not to do. I never in my wildest dreams ever had to think about having that conversation. But my Black friends think about that all the time. And so that has, you know, widen my lens and my perspective as to, you know, how am I being the best ally I can be? And so back to your question, Taylor, let me share a story, and it's maybe a little bit of reverse, where I learned more after the fact about how to be more bold. And so, you know, I was one of the first female supervisors with State Farm in the state of Kentucky. And I was at a meeting, and I think there were two females, and this was back in the 80s, so I'm dating myself a little bit. But I'll never forget, fast forward a couple of years, and we were at a meeting, and we were on a break, and I walked up to this group, not even thinking, because I'm not shy. I walked up to this group, and it was a group of white males. And they were talking baseball. Well, I'm a huge sports fan. And it was interesting because they were talking about, you know, salaries, and it was the beginning of the season. And I had just read a USA Today article. There was a full page that published all of the salaries of the teams in the American League and the National League. And I thought, oh, I've got something I can share. I said, wow, yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Can you believe that Alex Rodriguez's salary with the New York Yankees is more than the entire payroll of Tampa Bay. You would have sworn I had like something wrong with me. No one acknowledged my comments. No one, I mean, I was absolutely ignored. And I'm like, well, I know I've got my facts right. I read that. I know sports. And luckily it was the end of the break and I just walked away. And that, boy, I could have used an ally at that point. So was it because I was a woman? Was it because I was a woman who knew a little bit about sports? I don't know. But now as I reflect back on that and many other stories, now I'm a huge advocate for being an ally. And it also underscores that, you know, everybody's voice matters. And while we may not agree with what everybody says, I think it's so important to acknowledge and respond. You might just completely disagree with what they're saying, but from a respect perspective, acknowledge and respond to anybody who makes a comment, because for them it's coming from the heart. So I hope I answered the question, Taylor, but it's one that it's a very powerful story for me. And actually, in one of our conversations, I shared that a couple of weeks ago. And what was interesting is I probably had 3 of my former male colleagues send me an IM going, please tell me that wasn't me. And of course, you know, I respond, no, it wasn't you, but thank you for being vulnerable enough to ask me that question. So again, my main premise and building on what Ken said, just the whole importance of being an ally.
Tom, did you have anything you wanted to share on that topic?
I'm hoping Eileen is a Yankee fan, even though she's picking on the salary of the Yankees being in New York.
I'm a Boston Red Sox fan, Tom. I'm sorry.
You know, it's painful. My personality is one that inequities, if my anger levels can go up, right? That like when I was listening to you, like I just get a little bit tense because there's like in my mind, I'm thinking, how dare you even think of blaming yourself, right? So it's just powerful to listen to that, and maybe it's advice going forward for any person in that situation that they know it's not them. Like, don't question yourself, right? It's look outward, and to your point, having that ally next to you is where, you know, you can go shoulder to shoulder. And you know, when I was listening to Kent, it went back to when I was practicing law more regularly. I'd have conversations with clients that would ask me to say things that they could never say themselves. And, you know, I would often challenge them and say, well, if you think that's so important to say, you go talk to the adversary and share that information. It's very easy for you to put me in a position of, you know, market conflict and you're elsewhere. I think what it trained me to do is feel more comfortable in times of conflict. So I think, you know, from Kent's perspective and my perspective, you know, the go along to get along is something that has to be continually challenged, where you have to be ready for conflict. And I talk about it from a training perspective. To Eileen's point, that was a lesson that was training her for the next interaction. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to think through scenarios so that when it happens, you're ready to react, not, you know, driving home saying I should have or I could have. But I appreciate, Eileen and Kent, you sharing such powerful stories and experiences of your journey.
Yeah, we definitely appreciate your insights and for taking the time to share them today and being vulnerable enough to share them very much. I think that's all the questions I had for y'all at this moment. So appreciate y'all being here today.